You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcast. I have L.Ac. He's a registered acupuncturist and herbalist, and his focus appears to be cancer treatments, I assume using herbs and other alternative methods. So, Oscar, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Rich.
Yeah, tell me, so your focus is cancer treatment using what I guess traditional medicine calls alternative medicine?
That's a funny sentence you just said there. I like correcting. It's usually doctors, physicians that are saying, traditional medicine. And I think what you meant and what most people and doctors mean when they say traditional medicine, I think they're meaning conventional medicine. So what I practice is traditional medicine. What doctors and physicians practice is conventional medicine. So what I do has thousands of years of track record and written history. What the conventional physicians are doing, which is often pretty cool stuff, does not have thousands of years of written or oral tradition behind it. So. And I love correcting physicians when they say, when they're the ones that are thinking that they practice traditional medicine. I say, excuse me, I practice traditional medicine. You practice conventional medicine. Mm-hmm. It's basically whatever works that is safe and effective and appropriate for the patient, be it traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, Western herbal medicine, Jamaican medicine. I don't care where it's from, so long as it's safe and effective and is appropriate for the person. And that is including, conventional methodologies as well. So, I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
No, that's fine. I guess I have the joke that if everything needed a clinical trial, then no one should be eating any food or drinking any water because there's no double-blind clinical trial that proves that eating food is good for you. So we shouldn't be doing any of that, according to
that's right.
To that thing. So
fortunately, some things, although they don't have a clinical double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized clinical trial, they have a few thousand years of people commenting on the fact that it did X, Y, or Z, or at this dosage it was causing diarrhea, and at this dosage it wasn't strong enough, and at this golden dosage range it seemed to be just right. So whether that's for food and the energetic effect of cinnamon and ginger being warming, or iceberg lettuce and raw fruit as being cooling, or for some of the medicinal agents that we use in our apothecaries.
Yeah, what's interesting to me about I guess plant medicine or herbal medicine is that, again, I keep calling it traditional, but the normal medical system will give you pills that'll be an isolated compound, with some additives. But anytime you interact with an herb or a plant, you're getting, I guess the active compound, but you're getting hundreds and maybe thousands of ancillary compounds. And I don't think anyone understands how those ancillary compounds interact with, your physiology, but they seem to work pretty well. From what I understand, what's your thinking there?
Yeah, and interestingly, they seem to work pretty weller, if you will, more well when they are in a more natural milieu of phytochemistry. So there's no vitamin C tree out there. We all know vitamin C is great, but it exists within parsley, which is kind of one of the highest known sources of vitamin C. But you don't just get vitamin C; you get the fiber. You get the antioxidants, you get the bioflavonoids, you get some chlorophyll, you get all these different things, and your body recognizes that and knows what to do with it, as opposed to getting a huge bolus of just vitamin C, which, may or not be absorbed. And if it is absorbed, your body's like, well, I don't know what that is. I'll use maybe 20% of that, but the rest of it, who knows? So there's definitely a time and a place for the jackhammers that are, the pharmaceutical approaches that is one single compound. But what we see, even when we use those single, like in chemo, right? Like you get several chemotherapeutic drugs that are based off of one phytochemical that came originally from a tree or a shrub or plant or whatever, and those are useful to kill off some cancer cells. What we find is that when we pair them back up with the milieu of, for example, Taxol, right, from the Pacific yew tree, that's an entire tree that has all these different compounds, and if you just look at the taxanes alone, you'll see a family of about a dozen taxanes, which are, kind of the brothers and sisters of Taxol. They kind of have the same color hair and a similar nose, and instead of just getting, a million of, little Johnnies, you get, give the person a shot of a million little Johnnies, but add in, just for good measure, a little handful of his sister Susie and, his older brother, Timmy. And when the family is together, it tends to have a more balanced effect, and often even mitigate some of the side effects when you introduce the entire plant. We say whole herbs or whole foods for whole people. We are not just a bunch of chemicals strung together. There's a little bit more magic there, and you're absolutely right. We do know how some of these phytochemicals work, but when you put them in conjunction, we have no idea how they all work together, and I'm okay with that. There's a little unknown and magic, and there's a fellow herbalist, Robin McGee, who's a brilliant herbalist, makes amazing medicine, but she's definitely not a pedigreed PhD, phytochemist. She's, when her students ask her, well, how does that work? This is really rich in tannins, is it reacting this way or that way with the receptors? And she said, you know what? It's PFM. And said, PFM, what is that? And she says, pure fairy magic. That's how it works. And she's from South Carolina, and sometimes she substitutes the fairy with another word. But point is, sometimes we don't know exactly how it works, but at least when there's a written track record of it working from this dose to this dose and having a measurable outcome, it's pretty cool.
So what are some of the common treatments that you'll give? And I know it depends on the situation, but what are they, and how are they given? What's a few examples of what you give to people?
Yeah, well, you start with the basics, just with anything else. What are they eating? What are they not eating? What are they doing? What are they not doing? Not just their physical activity, but their mental and spiritual and emotional activity. And you start with those basic things because you can function really well without herbs. I'm a big fan of herbs, but you can't function very well without the basic three things, which is your adequate and balanced activity. Like I said, not just physical, but mental and emotional and spiritual. Your sleep and downtime, and your diet, and not just what you eat, but how you eat it. So I start there, and herbs are amazing, but they're duct tape. If those three things are, one of those three things are off, or all those three things are off, they'll keep you together, but it's not the long-term solution. So tinctures, decoctions, infusions, suppositories, nebulizer mixes. If it can go in you or on you, and it's natural, I'm all about it. I'm constantly trying to figure out ways to get some of these things into people through the skin, up their nose, eye drops. I love compounding. So I'll compound all kinds of stuff and find ways to, get people to put in their smoothie, do retention enemas, put it up their butt, you name it. I'm working all the angles.
What does a multivitamin look like in terms of the herb world or the plant world? If someone says, you need a multivitamin, or if you were to say that, how can they recreate that effect, but in a much better way using plants?
Well, I'd say a good breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That should be your multivitamin to start with. Unfortunately, the dirt that those plants, I'm a fan of a plant-based diet. Unfortunately, the dirt that the plants were grown in doesn't have the minerals that it used to 50 years ago. And unfortunately, even if the dirt and the plants had it, We're sucking in, breathing in, and absorbing all kinds of chemicals that are basically, burning up a lot of these nutrients at a faster rate and antioxidants. So unfortunately, most people do need, because of the dirt that's there and because of the air and water that they're exposed to, they need a little help. So, it still starts with a really solid breakfast, lunch, and dinner, especially breakfast is my big deal. But if you're going to do a supplement, it should ideally be kind of whole foods based rather than a synthetic, vitamin C per se. I mentioned parsley earlier. I'd rather see someone really concentrate some parsley and shove that into a capsule, and for the vitamin C, or at least get a non-GMO corn or a non-corn. Most vitamin C's out there are GMO corn based form of a synthetic ascorbate if you're going to go synthetic. But I'm a fan of the naturized stuff also, which means that you're basically feeding whatever nutrients, if it's zinc or vitamin C or and magnesium, you're feeding it to yeast or bacteria. The yeast are then eating it, and you reach a point of saturation in a big pot full of these live critters. And when they can't eat any more of the zinc, then you crush them up, dehydrate them, and shove them in a capsule. So rather than your stomach, seeing zinc, which is a metal, and it's like, well, I don't know what to do with that. It's kind of a rock. I'm not really great at digesting rocks, even though the capsule says that there's 60 milligrams of zinc in there. The stomach sees it. I'm like, I'll maybe use the first 5 or 10 milligrams, and after that, just sending it right on through, or vomiting it back up in the case of, me a few times, taking zinc supplements that were crappy and on an empty stomach in the morning and throwing it back up. But when they feed it to these live organisms, it's really cool. It's basically like a Trojan horse. So, the nutrients are inside the horse, and the horse gets through the intestinal wall and barrier a lot easier. It gets absorbed because your enterocytes, your system, recognize what yeast and bacteria look like, and they say, oh yeah, those are all crushed up little dead critters, I can eat them, and they'll just gobble them right up. And then the payload comes out from the Trojan horse once it's through the castle wall, and inside the Trojan horse is the zinc or the magnesium or the folate or whatever it is. So if you're asking about a supplemental type of thing, I'm kind of a fan of those too.
What if we're talking about serious conditions where someone's facing cancer? Do you help people in those situations? And if so, how do you navigate that? How do you help them?
Well, that's most of my patient base at this point. Is I work mainly with chronic disease and cancer patients. There's a system I didn't invent, like the chicken sandwich, called the ETMS. It stands for Eclectic Triphasic Medical System. Donnie Yance out in Oregon, probably one of the foremost geniuses, clinicians, and researchers of not just holistic cancer, but just cancer in general. He can run circles around most any oncologist I've ever met in terms of the Western approaches and pharmaceuticals and mechanisms of actions and dosings and clinical trials, but also can speak extremely intelligently upon herbs and genetics, genomics, immune therapy, so on and so forth. It's kind of a space alien kind of guy because he knows so freaking much. But anyhow, it's eclectic in that it's not just Chinese medicine. It's not just Western medicine or genetics or genomics. It's kind of like I mentioned, whatever works is inappropriate. And it's also a bit of a tip of the hat to the eclectic physicians who have an interesting history here in the U.S., especially before the AMA, especially in the South where I am, where there was a blockade in the Civil War, and people were still getting shot and diarrhea and malaria, and the white physicians were like, well, we're out of meds. Hey, Native American guys, what do you guys got? Hey, black people, what do you guys got? Hey, Irish people, what do you guys got? Hey, Creek, what do you guys got? And they said, well, you see that bush over there? We use that for diarrhea. And I said, oh, really? Let's write that down. And, they probably thought that was hysterical that they needed to write stuff down. But they did that hundreds of years ago in the U.S. And since then, we have some pretty good literature that dates back to see, what some of the other options are when you can't get the drugs in from the north because of the Civil War blockade. Anyhow, that's a little bit of a history lesson as to eclectic Triphasic because it's not just, if you can imagine a Venn diagram, it's 3 overlapping circles. It's, one circle is the you, being the patient or the host, and, all the basics of eating well, sleeping well, moving around well, the things that any traditional medicine practitioner is pretty darn good at. The second circle is the environment. So we look at your physical and chemical environment, your social environment, and see if you're, sleeping on your cell phone on top of your Wi-Fi underneath tower lines. There's no amount of chemo or my acupuncture or my herbs. None of those things are going to fix any of that. So, someone needs to be asking the question, what is your chemical and physical and electromagnetic toxicity load, and where's it coming from? And maybe that's why you got the cancer in the first place. The third circle, so you got the you, the first circle, second circle is the environment. Third circle is the cancer itself, which is where Western medicine tends to jump to, skip everything else, is not just where the cancer is located. It's microterrain and the more genetic details about the cancer, not just where it's located. So, is it wearing Nikes or Reeboks or a Yankees hat or a Braves hat under the genetic microscope? Because these are different cancers. So, 10 different guys with prostate cancer could have 10 totally different types of cancers. One is wearing Reeboks, another is wearing Nikes, and there's some drugs that do really well with the Reeboks, wearing cancers, but not so well with the Nike wearing cancers. And one has white shorts and a blue T-shirt, and one has blue T-shirt and, red shorts. So, going into further genetic analysis of these things sometimes guides us towards pharmaceutical as well as natural interventions. When you put all of these things together, like I said, you get the ETMS, and that's what we do for cancer patients. So it's not like we give everyone, turkey tail mushroom. It's a great mushroom, but it's all customized to, their environment, their condition, their constitution, their tumor genetics, and, what they want to be when they grow up. So it's nuanced.
Okay, so, again, I keep using the word traditional, but, nowadays it seems like radiation, chemotherapy, surgery are the triumvirate of ways that, science is treating cancer. Is it better for your interventions to come before or as an adjunct or after these traditional 3?
The conventional 3, yeah, you're right, is surgery, chemo, radiation. Yes, the answer is yes. It's best if they do it before, during, and after, all of these things. So if we, all the things that you just mentioned, none of these increase vitality. No one decides, I'm feeling kind of tired today. Let's go get some surgery or some radiation or some chemo. I'm feeling kind of hungover. Let's do some chemo. Everyone agrees that these things are pretty bad for you. Not that they're categorically a horrible option. Sometimes chemo is a good option. It's never a great option, but sometimes it's a good option. Radiation is almost categorically a bad option. Surgery can be a great option, especially once you shrunk the tumor down and gotten someone really strong. And now you just need to do a lumpectomy as opposed to a mastectomy. It's a much less invasive surgery. Recovery time is much shorter. It causes less inflammation. Inflammation, can cause recurrence. People want less invasive surgeries. People want less chemo. So there are ways to piggyback what we do in traditional medicine and functional medicine with the conventional treatments to where someone can still do the chemo. And yes, they're going to get beat up some by the chemo, but they're not going to get beat up as much because we spent a month, teaching them Kung Fu and putting on armor on them before they went into battle, as opposed to, hey, you're freaked out and scared. Oh, that's a great time to go into battle with no shield and no training. Because you're going to get beat up. So
what does that mean? Like if someone's going to have chemo and they say, all right, I'm going to do it, what's an example of an intervention you would do to help strengthen them so that they fare better with the chemo?
Yeah, so let's take breast cancer, right? A pretty common cancer. And the standard of care often for your, ER, PR positive cancers, your estrogen receptor and progesterone receptor positive cancers is going to be azithromycin, Cytoxan, and Taxol. So none of these are a walk in the park, right? Like I said, none of them are good for you. No one is claiming they're good for you. they're claiming that they're cytotoxic, meaning that they kill off cancer cells. Sometimes, not always. Sometimes they just kill off the good cells and they have no effect on the cancer cells. But a lot of the time, they kill off the cancer cells. So we also know that all of the time, they kill off the good cells as well. And some of these have a tropism towards different tissues. So, for example, adriamycin, aka doxorubicin, or the red devil, sometimes called, is really bad for your heart. And oftentimes, you might see someone be a quote-unquote success story from a cancer standpoint because their tumor shrank or they no longer have breast cancer, except they had a heart attack 2 years later and died because of that. Well, why'd they have the heart attack? Well, because you messed up their heart with the chemo. And the oncologist doesn't see it as, oh, it's not my problem. That's a cardiologist's problem. Didn't die of cancer, so I'm in the clear. So to answer your question, if we know that someone is going to do chemo and they're going to do adriamycin, ideally first we figure out if these are great fits for their cancer. And there's some advanced testing that can give us some clues as to whether these are a good fit or a great fit or a poor fit. Secondly, if we know that they're going to, if we say that they don't have money for that or don't have time for that or they're just not going to do it, okay, you're going to do chemo. Let's at least protect your heart because we know that this thing is going to cause really bad, guaranteed effects on your heart. So let's take a couple of weeks to a month to really strengthen your heart so that instead of starting from, a midway level vitality for the heart and go down to poor after the chemo, we start at, if it's a scale out of 5 out of 10, we maybe start at 5 and we take a couple of weeks and take you up to 9. And then you start the chemo at 9 so that when you take a hit, you take a hit right maybe down to 4 instead of taking a hit from, 5 to 1. So before, during, and after, there are some things like hawthorn, like CoQ10, like magnesium, which are fairly simple and really have no side effects, that you can do that increase cardiac output and strengthen the heart and don't really have any side effects. So ideally, before, during, and after, we can all, it depends on the chemo. So if you know what the chemo is going to mess up and you know how to strengthen that tissue and protect that tissue, then you do it before, during, and after. And you fare better. You can measure these things by, measuring cardiac output, by measuring NT-proBNP. You can measure galectin-3. These are all fairly non-invasive ways to measure, what's the status of your heart. Or, with Cytoxan, it's going to mess up your kidneys. So you measure, GFR, you measure BUN, phosphorus, you measure cystatin C. You measure before and see, okay, you're doing good, but, better to go into this even better. So let's give you, if you're going to do Cytoxan, which is another type of chemo, and it's going to mess up your kidneys, let's give you some kidney support before, during, and after that. And that way you come out, less scathed, because no one's claiming that they're going to go through chemo unscathed. But my patients tend to not so much lose their hair, tend to have their energy level pretty good when they run their lab work. Their, CBC, their white blood cells, their red blood cells are lower than they were originally, but not as low as the bald people that are sitting next to them in the IV room that are not doing the herbs and the diet and the meditation and all the stuff. So, but yes, before, during, and after, because they're doing the chemo.
Yeah, that makes sense. What I don't know, have you tracked, how the patients fare? Like how much better? I know everything's variable, but do they do a lot better? Do they do a little bit better? Does it depend on the cancer? Like, what have you observed? How helpful is your adjunct to what they're already doing?
Because I don't have the funds to do a double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial, I can't give you, exact statistical rates, right? And it's hard to compare, a 70-year-old with, pancreatic cancer, which I've had, to, 30-year-old with the skin cancer. Do you put those in the same group and say, hey, you did your herbal stuff with both of them and, one died? Well, yeah, but it's, hard, I'd have to have, 20 or 30, 25-year-olds with that exact same condition and 20 or 30, 70-year-olds with that exact condition and then split them in half and, only treat half of them. And then somehow blindfold myself and them. So I can just tell you from what my patients are noticing when they go into the IV room at hospitals where, typically you have, 5 to 20 people sitting there with IVs in them. And, it's a few times a month they do this. So they tend to kind of make friends with the people sitting next to them in the IV lounge. And they're seeing people look a lot worse than they are. And a lot of these people, they talk and they say, yeah, what are you in for? What are you in for? I got a breast cancer. I got prostate cancer. And, especially with a lot of the women there, a lot of the women also have, breast cancer that are sitting next to them. And I frequently, my patients tell me that they're in the hospital, that everyone else looks like, really bad, not much hair, really pale, not strong enough to do more chemo, whereas they're just kind of tired. And instead of running, one patient, I maybe her fourth or fifth round of chemo, she'd run a 5K that day, and she was exhausted. And she was upset because, her normal 5K time was 5 minutes off. Meanwhile, everyone there, can barely walk up the stairs to the IV suite. So it's very subjective. If I had some time and resources, I could easily compare, white blood cells, red blood cells, hematocrit, hemoglobin of my patients after chemo versus other patients after chemo, the same chemo. And I think you'd see a pretty significant difference. But, no one's funding this just yet.
Yeah, no,
partly because it's not one thing. I'm not giving everyone the same thing, which kind of makes the science a little bit harder. But there's the reality of, and the beauty of customized, individualized, holistic medicine. No, everyone isn't getting the same thing. So hard to just pin down one variable.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Are there any particular cancers that it seems to be much more effective than others? Like what's some of the variation that you notice in the effects on people?
I've been in practice for close to 11 years now, and I've really been honing in on working with cancer patients since 2012. So I can't say I have 25 years of, seeing every type of cancer there is out there. But I can say I've had great results, as in like no chemo, no radiation, no surgery, with a lymphoma case that went to no evidence of disease despite none of those conventional treatments. And she's maybe 3 or 4 years out now. She was diagnosed, and they said, well, option is chemo, and unfortunately it has like a 20% success rate. And if we can kind of hold this off, if it's slow growing, we recommend just kind of hang it until we need to do it. And then once we do it, though, we can't really come off of it. And so they said, let's give it 2 months to see if it's progressing at an advanced rate. And if it is, then we're going to start chemo. And if it's not, then we're just going to kind of watch and wait. And I said, great. So, warmed up my hands and said, we got nothing to lose here. We got 2 months and no one's in our way. So we put on a pretty robust protocol and, diet, lifestyle, herbs, sleep, all the rest, everything, all the things that I mentioned before. And follow-up PET CT scan, nothing shows up. So, the classic response from the doctors, blows my mind, but it always seems to be like a, patented cookie-cutter response. They say, whatever you're doing, keep doing, as opposed to, what the hell are you doing? I see 20 of you every day, and, everyone seems to, at best stay the same, if not get worse. You completely reversed. Aren't you the least bit interested in seeing what the heck you did? No, I think they maybe are interested, but they can't be interested because they can't be sitting there recommending the same thing to other people because it's outside of a conventional box. So that was a lymphoma. Stage 2 breast cancer that are ER, PR positive also tend to respond very well. And it's nice that we can monitor with not just imaging usually, but also blood work and thermography. And so it's, and these are typically fairly slow growing cancer. So it's not like a medical emergency that they jump into chemo or radiation or surgery right away. So we're able to kind of get a baseline on these things and put them on a protocol for a month or 3, and then measure them again to see what's up with the cancer and what's up with the person. And you typically see the person doing a lot better with their markers and the cancer shrinking and their cancer numbers getting lower. So that's always encouraging to see. And, we'd like to do that to where it kind of plateaued on the improvement, and at that point do some, less invasive surgery. When it's metastasized, it's a different story. I usually do recommend conventional treatment along with what we're doing again, yes, before, during, and after.
What, for very, very aggressive cancers, what's been your experience in helping people? Does it just help a little bit, not as much, or can it still dramatically improve their situation?
I think there's always something that you can do. I get calls from people that are in hospice. They got beat up already from chemo and radiation or surgery. And, at this point, the doctor is saying there's nothing that we can do. And then they call me. And of course, the person at this point is pretty beat up. Their vital force is really low. The cancer energy is pretty strong. And even in those situations, I think even helping someone make their transition to the next plane is still a role for the experienced clinician. I think essential oils are a beautiful way to do that. And there's always something that you can, I'm not going to claim that I can cure cancer with that patient or even a stage 2 or, a stage 1. But what I can say is I can make the process better for whatever your goals are and, be realistic with people and say, I don't think I have anything in my toolbox to make this thing completely go away, but I think we can do something to make your pain better or, in these end-of-life type of situations, I think people would rather be, cogent and have some level of clarity than just be, doped up on opiates and have that be the way that you leave. People would probably rather be cognizant enough to, get their affairs in order and, say goodbye to family and then leave a little bit more peacefully. That said, I've had great results when people are sent off to hospice and the doctors say, well, there's nothing else we can do. And then, here we are 3 years later doing push-ups. That's happened. And it was kind of convenient because the doctors were kind of out of the way. They said, nothing else we can do. I said, great, let's get to work.
Yeah.
So, it depends on the person. It depends on the cancer. And there are some very aggressive cancers out there. I'm now working with a 10-year-old with a brain tumor who has a recurrence, and it's a very rough situation. She's done chemo every day for over a year, and she's running around like every other kid. Her oncologist is blown away that she has the energy that she does and that she's functioning pretty much like all the other 10 and 11-year-olds.
Yeah.
But she's done chemo every single day for a year.
That's crazy.
And she was on a protocol. She was on the herbs and diets and all this stuff. It's a testament to her parents and her, obviously. But yeah, I've seen a 6-year-old be gone within 6 months with a glioblastoma brain tumor. Do I think I still was able to help in that situation? Yeah.
So is there anyone going around to as many cultures as possible and categorizing as much of the plant medicine, herbal knowledge as possible that's out there? Yeah,
Donnie, every day, spends 2 hours. The latest and greatest in cancer. And sometimes the latest and greatest is sometimes it's been around for 4,000 years. So yes, he, every day of his life, he sends us an email with the latest and greatest in the clinical trials and the studies and the latest on turmeric and black cumin seed oil and green tea or papaya or yoga or whatever it is. He sends us these updates via email. And, he's gotten a couple books out, and obviously not all this is in there, but he is cataloging, everything out there and any bit of either traditional usage and indications for the type of things that we see in cancer, as well as the studies that are in vivo or in vitro with cell lines and they upregulate, this enzyme or downregulate that inflammatory pathway. And, here's a journal that published it this month and the citation for, all kinds of stuff from, there's thousands of herbs. So yes, Donnie Yance is the one doing it with regard to cancer specifically. There's other herbalists that are doing this with regard to all manner of other things. But when it comes to cancer and natural medicine, and like you said, cataloging this stuff and, making a record of what does what, that'd be Donnie.
So if someone has, again, God forbid, cancer, and they're looking for help that's above and beyond, the triumvirate of death, I guess I can call it. How do they find someone that's good versus someone that really is just, woo-woo quack? And, how do you navigate this area of the world?
Well, I would recommend someone that has the Donnie training, the ETMS training. So it's a 60-hour holistic oncology training. They cap it off every year, every couple of years when they do the training, 20 people. And the first time I applied to be part of this training, I was rejected, and understandably so, because, I would have way too inexperienced. It would have been like trying to drink from a fire hose. The second time I got in, I think I'm the youngest person ever to have completed the training. It was still like drinking from a fire hose. But these folks have a pretty comprehensive understanding of the best that conventional medicine has to offer, which has some good things. I don't want to poo-poo conventional medicine entirely, but they also have a pretty solid understanding as to what traditional medicine offers. And, the best of both worlds, why not? So these are ETMS practitioners, and you can look them up on Donnie's Natura website. There's a link at the top. It says resources. If you go to, I think, naturahealthproducts.com, top right, it'll say resources. Scroll down, and so find a practitioner, type in your zip code, and we'll bring up the closest ETMS practitioners out there who have done this training. And I know most of them, even in person, and I'm on the phone with these guys every month on a conference call with Donnie. So we're all in pretty tight communications. Not to say that if someone is not on this list that they're a quack or worthless, but that's a good start.
Okay. Are there any common names for people that do what you do? Are they just called herbalists? Are they called something else? Or not everyone in the world can see you.
Yeah, about half the class was physicians, and half the class were herbalists / acupuncturists. And interestingly, 100% of the time, half the class was totally confused. So, when Donnie was talking about the yin and yang of things and the herbs and the vital force and the vital spirit, the doctors were like, "What are you talking about?" And of course, all the acupuncturists and traditional medicine folks are like, of course, this is easy. Well, maybe not easy, but my language. And when, Donnie was talking about the alpha-ketoglutarate and the citric acid cycle and the, CA125 versus the CEA versus the, hematocrit and hemoglobin and D-dimer and fibrinogen and fibrin, a lot of the acupuncturists and herbalists were kind of scratching their head saying, I kind of remember maybe some of the stuff from biology, but I'm not completely up to speed on all these things. So, like I said, it was drinking from the fire hose, no matter, who you were. Pretty much everyone was, confused when they were talking about genetics because, the doctors aren't really trained in this stuff, and the acupuncturists and herbalists aren't trained in this stuff a whole lot either. So it still is a learning curve. I mean, I'm spending hours and hours each week, keeping up with Donnie stuff and the latest with genetics and genomics and herbs and nutrients and drugs and the interactions between all those things. So, to answer your question, it can be a doctor, it can be an herbalist, but if it's a herbalist, you're always guaranteed that they're going to look at the basic things, the diet, lifestyle, your sleep, look at the whole big picture. If it's a doctor, you're not always guaranteed that. They may just focus on the cancer, and they may have a great effect on reducing the tumor size, but they killed you in the meantime. So the docs that go through this training have a much more keen, aware understanding of, the big picture and the person and the environment, not just that cancer.
Excellent. Oscar, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. Any URLs or resources for people that want to learn more, or essentially have you given it already?
I don't know. Donnie has some pretty good books. I'm in Atlanta. I'm happy to help people. And oftentimes, I've had patients in Utah, and, my first inclination is to try to get someone local. But sometimes there just isn't anybody that knows what I do and has the depth of experience or the breadth of experience. And I love collaborating with other acupuncturists, herbalists, and physicians in other places. And they'll let me be in charge of all the herbs and diet and lifestyle stuff, and they'll, run some labs or do some prescription drugs as needed, or some acupuncture locally. I obviously can't do that over the phone, but I love collaborating with folks from across the country. And so I'm happy to help someone myself. My own company is Sierra Botanica and Collaborative Medicine. Hence the name. I love collaborating. I'm not always the one slinging needles, but I'm happy to be the one kind of overseeing the big picture, make sure no stone gets unturned. So there's that, Sierra Collaborative Medicine, and the Donnie Natura healthproducts.com, as well as his nonprofit Mediri Institute as his clinic, dedicated to educating folks, physicians alike, and acupuncturists, herbalists, naturopaths. When I did the training, we even had a veterinary med person in our training, because, dogs and cats get cancer too. And why not also use the herbs and holistic approach for that? So, yeah.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, Oscar, thank you for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Anytime. Happy to help.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.